If there is a single metric that keeps Canadian policymakers awake at night, it isn't the price of oil, the strength of the dollar, or even the latest election polling numbers. It is a much quieter, more insidious figure: the rate at which the nation's most highly educated young professionals are packing their bags and buying one-way tickets south. For decades, the relationship between Canada and the United States has been defined by a friendly, if slightly unequal, partnership. But in recent years, this dynamic has shifted from a cooperative exchange into something that looks increasingly like a demographic vacuum. To understand the scale of this issue, one only needs to look at the graduating classes of Canada's top universities. At the University of Waterloo, widely considered the MIT of the North, a staggering percentage of software engineering graduates do not stay in Ontario. They don't move to Vancouver or Montreal or Calgary. They move to California, Washington, and New York. This isn't just a trickle of talent. It is a fire hose of human capital spraying directly into the American economy. The reason for this exodus begins with a reality that Canadians are often reluctant to admit. Culturally, the friction of moving to the United States is almost non-existent. Unlike a move to Europe or Asia, moving from Toronto to Chicago, or from Vancouver to Seattle, requires almost zero cultural adjustment. You speak the same language, you watch the same sports, you consume the same media, and you operate within a nearly identical corporate hierarchy. The transition is seamless. But the ease of movement isn't just cultural, it is structural. The TN visa, a byproduct of the NAFTA agreement, allows Canadian professionals in specific fields, engineers, scientists, accountants, and architects, to work in the U.S. with a simple stamp at the border. There is no lottery system, no agonizing wait for a green card sponsorship that plagues other immigrants. For a qualified Canadian, the border is less of a wall and more of a turnstile. This structural ease creates a unique vulnerability for the Canadian economy. It means that the labor market for Canada's top talent is not domestic. It is continental. A bank in Toronto isn't just competing with a bank in Montreal for a senior analyst, it is competing with Wall Street. A tech startup in Kitchener isn't just fighting for talent against Shopify. It is fighting against Google, Amazon, and Meta, all of whom can offer compensation packages that are mathematically impossible for Canadian firms to match. This brings us to the first pillar of the problem: the productivity gap. For the better part of 2 decades, Canadian productivity has stagnated while American productivity has surged. This isn't an abstract economic concept. It translates directly into wages. In the United States, high-skilled labor is viewed as a premium asset, priced accordingly in a hyper-competitive market. In Canada, due to a lack of business investment and a more risk-averse corporate culture, wages for the same roles remain suppressed. When a 25-year-old engineer looks at 2 job offers, one in Toronto for 80,000 Canadian dollars and one in Austin for 120,000 US dollars, the math creates a gravitational pull that patriotism simply cannot overcome. The decision is made even easier when you consider the purchasing power of that income. The Canadian dollar has persistently traded at a discount to the greenback, meaning that every dollar earned south of the border goes significantly further, not just in nominal terms, but in real, tangible wealth accumulation. This wage disparity creates a feedback loop. As the best talent leaves, Canadian companies struggle to innovate, which leads to lower productivity, which restricts their ability to pay higher wages, which causes more talent to leave. It is a cycle of decline that has turned the 49th parallel into a one-way filter for ambition. However, the allure of the United States is not fueled by high wages alone. If income were the only variable, perhaps more Canadians would stay for the social safety net, the safety and the political stability that Canada has long advertised as its distinct advantage. But the equation has been fundamentally altered by a second, more crushing variable: the Canadian housing crisis. For a generation of young Canadians, the social contract has broken. The promise that hard work and a good education would lead to a middle-class life, defined by home ownership and financial security, has evaporated in Canada's major cities. In Toronto and Vancouver, the ratio of median home price to median income has spiraled to levels that make them some of the most unaffordable cities on the planet. A detached home in a Toronto suburb now costs considerably more than a similar home in almost every American metropolitan area, with the exception of perhaps San Francisco or Manhattan. But crucially, the exodus isn't just heading to those expensive American coastal hubs. Canadians are increasingly moving to secondary U.S. cities, places like Raleigh, Dallas, Charlotte, and Atlanta. In these markets, the contrast is stark. A Canadian professional moving to Dallas can often double their salary while simultaneously cutting their housing costs in half. In Canada, a dual-income professional couple might struggle to afford a 2-bedroom condo in a commuter town an hour away from their jobs. In Texas or North Carolina, that same couple can purchase a 4-bedroom house with a swimming pool and still have disposable income left over to invest. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. When a population feels that the basic milestones of adulthood are mathematically out of reach in their home country, They stop viewing their home country as a place with a future. They begin to view it as a place of stagnation. This is where the narrative of quality of life begins to flip. Historically, Canadians argued that while they earned less, they lived better. They cited healthcare, low crime, and functional public schools. But for the young, upwardly mobile demographic that is leaving, the housing crisis is a quality of life catastrophe that outweighs those benefits. What good is free healthcare if you cannot find a family doctor? What good is a safe neighborhood if you will be renting a basement apartment in it until you are 40? The United States, for all its political polarization and social volatility, still offers the tangible possibility of material advancement. This is particularly true for the medical profession, a sector where the brain drain has life or death consequences. Canada's healthcare system is effectively a state monopoly. Doctors are paid through government billing codes, which are capped and regulated. In the US, the private-public mix allows specialists to earn 3, 4, or even 5 times what they would make in Canada. The result is a steady bleed of physicians and nurses south of the border, exacerbating the very healthcare crisis that makes Canada less attractive to stay in. We see the same pattern in academia and research. Canada produces world-class PhDs, funded by taxpayer-subsidized tuition, only to see them set up their labs in Boston or the Bay Area, because the research grants and private funding in the US dwarf what is available domestically. Canada effectively acts as an incubator for the American economy, bearing the high cost of raising and educating citizens from birth through university, only to hand over the finished productive asset to a foreign neighbor just as they enter their peak tax-paying years. It is an enormous subsidy paid by the Canadian taxpayer to the U.S. Treasury year after year, with no invoice ever sent. The structural integration of the North American economy, intended to lift all boats, is increasingly creating a scenario where the smaller vessel is being drained to keep the larger one floating.